I'm calling this meeting to order, and we have several items in the agenda, so we are going to try to be very efficient today. So the first one will be Sunset Lakecomer Agreement.
Oh, I guess I'm alone. Good evening, Mayor and, Council Member and Council President. Today we bring the Sunset Latecomers Agreement, and it's in an ordinance form to you. And this has been a process that the city chose to do clear back in 2016. It's part of the Sunset area improvements, and there's been some, there's been some, a lot of work that's been done up in the Sunset area. So the state law authorizes latecomers or cost recovery agreements for several different types. You can do them for streets and also for utility projects. And the city can also do latecomers agreements as acting as the developer, and that is what the city has done in this case. So I wanted to show you, so the Sunset project, this is what it looked like up on the hill in 2012. You can see there were, the road was different, there were numerous buildings up there, they were in various and sundry dilapidated shapes, there were some, and now in 2019, this is what the finished product looks like. The road has been realigned, there's a park up there, the library is there, and the rest of the parcels are ready for development. So this latecomer agreement ordinance was part of the city's vision after years of planning and work in the Sunset area. The relocation of the street and the utility installations were identified in the Sunset Area Community Investment Strategy. The Ordinance 5783 was adopted February 1st in 2016 that established the need for the roadway and the utility improvements. The owners of the benefited properties were sent a preliminary notice of assessment on March 29th of 2016, and there were no appeals at that time. Then Council adopted Resolution 4289 on June 13th, 2016, that established the latecomer boundary, a preliminary assessment, and the assessment method. And then that project was completed in 2019. So the triggers for this particular latecomer agreement will be for water if the demand is for 15,000 gallons per minute. Sewer is if they're required to develop under the RMC. And transportation is if it generates new workday trips. So if someone has a smaller house up there if you look at this area, this is the latecomer assessment, and you can sort of see that 10, 11, 12, 13, at 14 and 15, those are all smaller parcels with some single-family residents still on those. Those will not be required to hook up unless they do some significant redevelopment. So those will be triggered by that. The other latecomers agreement boundaries are, parcel 1 is the park, parcel 6 is city property, and then the others, there's a couple private owners, and some are owned by the RHA. This is the comparison between the preliminary assessment and the final assessment. This was a fairly expensive project. Not every parcel has every assessment on it. Some of the ones around the park area have the water, sewer, and T is transportation. You can see that parcel 1, which is city-owned, is larger than the preliminary assessment. That is because in the final assessment, the city chose that it was fair for the benefited properties for the city to absorb more of the administrative costs of the project. And then you can also see that the water costs on some of those 10 through 15 are smaller because the water costs came in less. And again, the city absorbed some of those administrative costs as the when assessing the benefit. So your next steps. Usually when you get a latecomer or cost recovery agreement before council, it's come through as an actual agreement. Usually there is a private developer develops some infrastructure like a utility or sewer line or water line, and then you do the same process of preliminary assessment, notice of appeal, complete the project, and then come back to council, but it's an agreement that's before you. When Larry Warren, the former city attorney, was setting up this project, it made more sense, and I think it does too, to, instead of having the city enter into a latecomer agreement with itself, that the best way for the city to effectuate that is to call it a latecomer ordinance, which has the final assessment. And we will then, so the next step is tonight, the staff is recommending that council have a first reading of the ordinance and adopting the latecomer final assessment for each of the benefited properties. And then step 2, the clerk's office will then send out notice of that final assessment to the benefited properties. This is required by the statute. The city will allow 20 days to appeal that from the date of mailing. And if there are no appeals, then the city staff will bring back to council for second and final reading of the ordinance adopting and establishing the latecomer assessment. After that, then it's recorded and on the benefited properties. When there is development activity that triggers the latecomer, then the property owner will have to pay that as part of their development costs.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Okay, so I have a report to sign, and I appreciate it. Mr. Levy, Mr. Mayor, you're next. Thank you. Emerging issues is next.
Thank you, Madam President and council members. I'm Doug Levy here as your regional state federal affairs consultant. And the two issues that I think we were asked to go over with you, one is the pending payroll tax legislation, which is now House Bill 2948, that's in front of the legislature and due for a hearing Thursday. And secondly, we were going to give you a very quick flyby of a discussion that occurred on countywide transit with council member Up the Grove, and we have a handout that goes with both of these things. I'll just say quickly on the payroll tax discussion, we would like to know if any of you want to be testifiers when this comes up for hearing Thursday. And on the transit item, you'll see something stamped draft at the top. We very much want your input into that if we go down the road of working on a countywide transit ballot. So starting with House Bill 2948, it's a little tricky. That used to be House Bill 2907. It was a bill that didn't get voted off the floor in time to make the cutoffs last Wednesday. A new bill was drafted that has a very small impact on the state budget, and thus this bill is not subject to cutoff deadlines, and that's why you see a switcheroo from 2907 to 2948. There's a one-pager here that gives you all the key items that are in the legislation. If it's okay, I might like to hand off to Mr. Mayor. I think he wanted to go over just a few of the big picture items that some of the mayors have been talking about, and then I can fill in with the details of the legislation.
Okay, thank you, Doug. So this is the first time I got to sit at this desk. It's a
You're
different
doing
view.
great.
So this is an issue that the mayors have really taken a lot of interest in. It could have a huge impact on the community and the businesses. We all know there's a need for this. The issue is this the right one? Is it being done in the correct way? Some of the key issues, I mean, there's the preemption part and taking away some of the taxing authority of the city is one concern. The other concern is if this is going to go through, making sure that there's equal distribution. There's a number of things that have been brought up by the mayors, and I'll go over a couple of them. Like I said, the preemption one is a real heartache for a lot of people. making sure that there's a cap on administration so that the administrative part of this doesn't get out of line or out of hand. Originally, it was very disproportionate in terms of the amount that was funded to Seattle versus the outlying cities. Since then, that's come into play much better. And then there was a 10% cap on mental health, which that's actually gone up. The thing that was just brought up today, which is actually a great possibility that we're going to look at, is hopefully allow some of this funding to be used in cleanup, some of the cleanups that we have in the areas throughout the city. So those are the big issues that the mayors are dealing with right now, and I'm going to hand it back to Doug to get into some more of the details. Thank you.
So while there's been some nervousness about this legislation and whether it's being brought prematurely to the legislature in the absence of data about impacts on businesses throughout the county, one of the things we've also wanted to do that the mayor mentioned is we've wanted to make sure that if this legislation is going to go forward, there's in essence an equity and a fair share component for communities like Renton. So I've been one of the ones who has been at several of the negotiating sessions around this legislation, and when House Bill 2907 was first in play, there was a 43% off the top distribution that was going to the largest city in the county, and then everyone else was going to split up 57% of the revenue, which, by the way, is alternated between $120 million a year to now an estimate of $150 million a year with a little bit higher payroll tax rate of 0.25 of 1%. So the bill now has direct distributions in it for cities of 60,000 or more, and those are in two places in the bill. One is an off-the-top 1/10 of 1% that goes to cities of 60,000 and over, and another is a 20% of the remaining funds would go to cities of 60,000 and over for use on affordable housing, public safety related to behavioral health, and the like. A few of the things that I would share that are not in the bill that we still plan to get into, and they're the type of things that are primed for testifying on when this bill comes up Thursday. One is the point the mayor shared around cleanup of encampments. A number of the cities have talked and feel like that's a very applicable use of dollars when you're talking about affordable housing, homelessness. Another is the point that I think council members and Councilmember Perez and others dealt with just a few minutes ago in planning and development, and that's the affordable housing money and how it's split. We are suggesting that ought to be based on units, not just on money, because there's such a differential in land prices and land availability depending on where you are in the county. We've also suggested that absent a good understanding of how this impacts businesses throughout the county, that there at least ought to be a delayed effective date of the new tax to January 1st, 2021. So you can see there are a number of things in this, what we call HB 2948 priorities document. And then, as I said, the other is a one-page highlight of what's currently in the bill with a few bullets at the end about things that are not included. So maybe we should pause there and see if any of you have any questions.
Sure. Any questions?
Yes, Council President.
Councilmember O'Halloran.
So my question is, it's my understanding that we're actually trying to co-locate high-quality wage jobs in communities with a housing component, obviously, so that people who have the skills to have a high-paying job don't have to sit in traffic for an hour to get somewhere where we can, provide that type of employment. So I guess my question is, how does this impact our ability to attract and retain the companies that are in these high wage categories, and have we gotten any feedback from them about the impact that this might have on some of their decisions?
So I'd answer that two ways, Councilmember O'Halloran. One is that a lot of the discussion on this bill that precipitated the legislation started out of Seattle and with Seattle companies that were suggesting this. And so when we learned of it, one of the things that the mayor and the chief of staff immediately asked our economic development folks to do was to outreach to about 15 of our largest businesses and see if they had any input. We did get one very interesting response to the point of your question from Mitsubishi Aircraft, which just made a headquarters decision last year. And it was a troubling response, and it was a response that indicated that while this legislation may be well-intentioned, they might base their future decisions and future employment counts on what happens with this kind of a bill. The problem is the rest of them, we haven't gotten a lot of input back. We don't know a lot about the granular business impacts of this kind of legislation. We've asked several times to get a better understanding of how this impacts businesses city by city, and we don't have that kind of data yet. We only have the most global data about how much it raises.
Any more questions? No, that's it.
And then proceeding on to the second item, and I think we were asked to talk about the transit issue. And for perspective for council members, I think many of you have heard this before, but in August of this year is the 6-year time limit on a transportation benefit district measure that was passed in the city of Seattle, where the city of Seattle under that TBD is essentially purchasing premium bus service from King County Metro. They, under their TBD, which comes up for expiration, they're purchasing about 350,000 hours of service that goes into their community. And this is happening all at the same time as Metro is updating what they call their mobility framework, their Metro Connects program, and importantly for areas like Renton, they're looking at the equity of transit service and how you do a better job serving diverse populations with transit. A number of things that we feel are going to reflect the high reliability or the high need for transit in the Renton community and other areas of South County. But with respect to this 6-year expiration of the TBD, one of the questions is whether Seattle will simply elect to re-up their TBD and their premium transit service, or whether there should be instead a county-wide transit measure brought to voters. And that's one of the things that brought County Council member Dave Upthegrove to visit with the mayor and others of us on Friday. He's a really important player in this discussion for two reasons. One, he chairs the County Council Mobility and Environment Committee, where any of this would go through substantively. Secondly, he chairs the Regional Transit Committee, of which Councilmember McKerven is a member. And so those two bodies will have a lot to say about a countywide transit measure and whether it's brought to the ballot. Just to give you a sense of the timing here, if indeed there is going to be a countywide transit measure brought to voters in August, the County Council has a drop-dead date of early May to submit that to the ballot, which means backing up, there needs to be a lot of work done between end of February, early March, and mid-April on what that should look like. And so the visit from Councilmember Upthegrove was really based on his instincts of wanting to see something that is county-wide so that we don't continue to have a more service for Seattle, less service for everyone else dynamic. And I think he, with visits Friday to both Mayor Pavone and Mayor Ralph of Kent, wanted to make sure that, you know, there wasn't some belief that he was shooting way off base. I think, and I'll let the mayor jump in and speak for himself, but I think we tried to make the point that if there's going to be a ballot measure. We know in Renton that a significant amount of additional transit service is needed. We would want to make sure that Renton gets a fair share of that. The reason we handed you this one page or front and back page document for your input is we do know from visiting with Metro staff, and they actually made a point of coming over and meeting with Councilmember McCurvin in his role on the RTC. We do know that Metro staff would be looking at something that puts a lot of focus on service hours, but also on what they call speed and reliability improvements in local communities, first mile, last mile connections in local communities. And so we've done some early thinking I'll emphasize at a staff level about if there's going to be a transit measure, and we're going to begin the work of what goes into it, what sorts of things make sense for the Renton community. So again, I want to emphasize that it's early, but things could move very quickly. I think that's why the council president wanted you all to be briefed on this a bit, but that's kind of where things stand. I think decisions could get made very soon about a county-wide ballot, and with that, I'll turn it over to the mayor and see if he wants to add anything.
Well, I think Doug actually summed it up pretty well. Councilmember Updegrove did ask, what my feeling was is in terms of the transit, the TIB. And I guess the issue really is, are we a city that's going to be revolving around transit or not? If we don't support this now, what is it going to look like in 6 or 7 years? Because that's the next time that this will come around, is a minimum of 6 years, and actually implementation will be 7 years. So nobody wants to be the tip of the spear for a new tax anywhere, but I think it's something that we definitely should think about, especially with all the work that we're doing in terms of development around transit-oriented areas. So, but I look forward to your input.
Thank you. Thank you to both of you. Any questions from council?
Madam President?
Yeah, Councilmember Corman.
Yeah, so I really like it. I like the being proactive about transit, supportive. One thing I'm debating whether to mention this or not, but I would love to have the Route 111 included in some of our future desire list. That's an extremely effective commuter route that serves a great section of the Renton Highlands. Many of my neighbors, including my own son, take it every day to downtown Seattle, and it has it goes to Seattle 5 or 6 times in the morning, and he has 5 or 6 opportunities to return in the afternoon, and it doesn't run on weekends, By leaving it on, I know it may not be as important as getting some of these others up, but by leaving it off, I'm always afraid that we'll give the message that that's not an important route for us, and the opposite's true. It's a very desirable route. I mean, it's one that I'd love to see even on weekends, but certainly more running it a little bit later into the morning and having return trips a little bit earlier in the afternoon would be great. So.
Madam President? I would also say that that would be true of the 114.
I will add a question. Are we in a rush, or we can wait until this Friday that we have the retreat? So actually during the retreat, we can discuss more if, council members have a certain concern in certain areas where they will see increase on transit areas, I guess.
I believe you absolutely have time to do this at the council retreat, and that would be a very appropriate place. And I want to say to council members Corman and O'Halloran, you shouldn't hesitate. We want ultimately whatever we put together to have council's imprint on it.
Great. Thanks.
Yeah, so Councilmember Berman.
Thank you. So looking at the two categories of expanding service hours and speed and reliability, I'm noticing a little bit of a theme in terms of trying to get people between downtown and the landing. Are these some of these options meant to be pick one or the other, A or B, or are these things that we would see be potentially being done in concert? Or is it just providing options for the county saying, here's a menu of ways you could choose to get people between these two places?
It's a great question, Councilmember McCurvin. I think right now we're trying to get a number of things on a list, and how we group them and prioritize them. I again think we're going to really want to rely on our elected officials to do that.
So if everybody agrees, we can table this one and have a robust discussion during the retreat?
Sure.
Okay? Thank you very much for all the work that you have done in these two items. I know that has been very hard, this session. But thank you. And thank you, Doug, for the other two things that just passed today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Census. Gina, you're on. Census 2020, very, very important.
Thank you for having me, Council Member and Council President. I'll be really quick and short. So we only have 17 days to go for when March 12th comes, when the online portals will be available for everybody to respond. And we do this because why we're making this a priority is because it's funding for the next 10 years. It's funding that our residents use for SNAP, WEEK, Section 8, and many of the money that comes through grants to the city. And if we don't get this right, we won't get the necessary funding and representation in Congress. And it is estimated that for every people that do not get counted, it's a 2,000 loss for the next 10 years. So we really have this one chance to get this right for the next 10 years. If we don't, we'll be suffering the consequences for the next 10 years. So our challenge is the historically undercounted populations, which, as you've seen, is communities of colors, among others. And Renton has seen a significant minority growth in the last years. And as you see in the 2010 census, these were the results. The color, these were the areas that were missed on the census. And specifically, Benson, West Hill, and Highlands are the most undercounted areas in the whole United States. These are considered the hardest to count tracts in the whole United States. So this means that the city of Renton in the 2010 census had an average of 60 to 65% response rate compared to the national average, which is 76%. Some of the city efforts for a complete count is identifying Renton census ambassadors. These are people the community knows and can go to the community and talk about the census. We have also launched a Renton Complete Count community. This is a list of stakeholders around the community that have a platform that they can talk to a wide network of people in the city. And we have also started to do a citywide training for everybody in the city that has frequent interaction with the public to be a census advocate. And we're hoping to set up a different set of questionnaire assistance centers and a very robust marketing campaign to make sure that Renton residents are informed and feel safe in filling out their census. So why am I here today? I'm here to ask each and every one of you to be a census advocate, to help us get the word out about why the 2020 census is safe and important. Each of you have to have a platform and a network that you can reach out to and convince people that it matters to be counted. And we only have one chance every 10 years. We recently had a video posted in our Facebook media, social media, and it had one of the most views from our Facebook page. So I sort of ask you to share the importance through your networks, in social media, in meetings, in any way that you have as a platform to share information about the census, because we really do need help from trusted messengers such as yourself to get the word out about the 2020 census. Yes, and tell people that it's safe and it's confidential. A recent Pew Center report indicated that 56 of the U.S. population still think that the citizenship question is still on there. So making sure that people is 10 questions, 10 minutes, they'll have a 10-year impact. So share on your social media or any other platform. Thank you.
Any questions for council?
Any questions?
Well, thank you very much, Gina, but obviously we did very, very bad 10 years ago, so we need to do much better this year. And you said, okay, Council McCurvin has a question.
Oh, not a question, just a comment. I said I can't help but notice that my neighborhood is one of the shaded-in ones in Benson, so I suppose I can do my part to convince at least my neighbors near me so that they should do it, so.
Yeah, that will be great. I'm very concerned. I'm very concerned because the numbers don't lie, and the fact that we were highly undercounted 10 years ago, that is a red alert for all of us. So everybody has to do their part, and I appreciate that. Anything else? So, Pretty?
Yes,
Thank you very much, Ina. Representation. Pretty, we're going to talk about inclusion.
Thank you. That's a perfect segue into my presentation, and I do want to kind of double up on what Gina said. You are the most trusted messengers in this community, so please take advantage of that and get our people to take the census. It's my pleasure. I'm Preeti Sridhar from the Executive Department, and it's my pleasure. It's actually my privilege to give this presentation to you. On behalf of the entire city. I feel like I'm trying to get 14 years into 14 minutes, so I'll speak very, very fast. And what I want to say here is that all I'm going to be able to do now is to give you a little glimpse into all the work that the city, staff from the city, and frankly, the entire community has come together to recognize this diverse and vibrant community and work towards serving. So I'm going to give you some highlights, but what I'm going to basically tell you is that we've laid a really great foundation, and we are available to talk about some of the details so that you, as the policy-making body for this community, can look at where do we want to continue to go and build on this foundation and, start making decisions as we go forward to build on this, because that's about the best we can do in this little time. So Renton is actually, well appreciated for being a community, a city that's inclusive and informed and works towards building opportunities for all. And we have these changing demographics that Gina alluded towards, and if we start looking from 2000 to 2010, we've seen 165+ % change in our minority population. If we look at that coming towards 2019, that number goes to 225% changes. Wallet Hub did a study, and they published that recently. We are the 7th most diverse city when we look at mid-sized cities. And the history, like I said, goes back 14 years to 2006. In 2005, we did have a diversity commission that's still there in the Renton Municipal Code. The commission was the Human Rights Commission and the Ethics Commission. They were not very efficient in coming up with their work plan, but we had a major trigger. In December 2006, those of you who were here at that time will remember we had the Hanukkah Day storm where Puget Sound Energy cut there was a major windstorm, 500,000 people in this area lost electricity, and then there was days of icy cold weather, and people lost power. And why that's important and why that goes back to our demographics is our community, our entire region, had lots of immigrant populations and people lost lives. 14 people in our region lost lives because they brought their barbecue grills inside and there was carbon monoxide poisoning. One of those awful cases was in Renton. At that time, our former fire chief, who was a PIO with the city of Renton, called me, and I had just started working 2 months prior as the communications director with the city of Renton, saying, Preeti, we have someone who's died in Renton. And I had picked up a rotary phone in my home to answer that call with tears running down my face. We had to do something about it. The first time in the history of this region, the Seattle Times published, and actually the Tacoma Times had to publish this paper because the Times did not have ability to publish their front page in different languages saying, do not bring your grills inside. This was before Facebook, this was before internet. So it was a big wake-up call for us. We had to do something, and we in Renton did something. We worked with emergency department and with fire to launch our inclusion program. So we were ahead of the game there. And our focus was external outreach, our customers, emergency preparedness, and fire. And then very soon after, we started working with our police department. And I'd encourage Ed to join me here as we talk about some of the things we did 14 plus years ago. And as you can see, we started working, like I said, with fire and emergency preparedness. You'll see some faces here. This is a photograph I got from that many years ago. Our friend Julio is here. Julio was there last week with Gina working on Census. So we really worked to create at that time our community liaisons and efforts with our community to reach out, and we took this very seriously. Ted is also here in this photo, as you can see. I was many, many, many pounds lighter. But then we really took this seriously, and in 2012, we changed our business plan to say we just don't want to do outreach and inclusion as a check mark in the corner here. We want this to be part of who we are and what we are as a city. And 3 folks, because we bring this to the council every year, we integrate this into our business plan, and you not only blessed it, but gave marching orders to say, this is what our city is going to be. And inclusion and equity became part of the city's business plan and, part of our mission statement. And you've said this everywhere you go, saying this is how Renton looks at inclusion and equity. It's part of the way we do business. It's part of our DNA. And in 2014 was another major step. We have in our audience Ms. Benita Horn, who we got as a consultant, and she's an expert. She's known around the world, not just the country. And she came here and she spoke to probably every individual at City Hall and outside to say, what does inclusion mean? And she helped bring to our city a real mindful look at what inclusion and equity means, and really helped us change the way we think. Ed you can see the smile on Ed's face because he agrees with all of that and more. And I'm not going to read all this, but essentially that's the approach that everybody here in the city has, whether it's the person who's sitting right down at the lobby who greets everyone who walks in, or whether it's Mike Stenhouse at the shops, or it's, people, because we know it's a learning process. But that's the thing. It's a learning process, and everyone's embraced it, and everyone's working towards it. But we have a long way to go. I will never say that we're there yet. And here are some of the things that have been changing as we've gone along. The community liaisons are now Mayor's Inclusion Task Force. We actually had someone who called last week and called Council President Perez to say, how much do I have to pay to become Mayor's Inclusion Task Force members? That's the excitement people have. They want to pay to get in. So, and as times have gone, and as the chief can say, as we've seen that there are needs in certain communities, we've expanded. We've made, inroads into the African American community and into the Latino community, and we're still working to get into the Vietnamese community, and Council Member Kim is going to help us there, so she's smiling. And we've tried to do things like get language line. We've just finished some translation protocols that we're working on. And we've been out there doing lots of different forums, and some have been great, and some we've had to work on some more. And one of our students at Renton High School was furiously taking notes last week, saying she's going to get us in again. And festivals. And, everybody loves the Renton Multicultural Festival, but I just love putting this presentation together because I'm going to tell you now that before the Renton Multicultural Festival, we had 2 years of the Renton Night Market at the Highlands that one of our liaisons, Duke Tran, put together. And before that, we had the Community Festival with Unity in all caps at RTC. So we've tried different things, but then the most successful so far has been the Multicultural Festival. And of course, this year we're going to try to unite that with the Renton River Days. And I don't know, Chief, if you want to talk about the partnership with the RAP.
Yes. Good evening, everybody. Back in 2014, with the help of Benita, or shortly after, it's actually the beginning of 2015, after Ferguson incident, we had a large mistrust within the African American community and law enforcement. So we teamed together with Benita and Preeti and Dr. Linda Smith and created RAP, the Renton African American Pastoral Group. And it was an effort to reach out to their community and build a relationship, build talking points, answer questions, have hard discussions. And that's kind of how we started, with forums and different meetings that we would have each month. And we've kind of grown from that, and it's certainly established a lot of relationships. That's the biggest thing that we've gotten out of this. We've had several incidents that have happened in Renton, and with Dr. Smith and some of the members that have attended those meetings have been able to reach out to me or some of my staff to kind of get the real information about what's going on. So that was a direct result from the relationship that we established at the pastoral group. I know the next slide you had, I wanted to kind of specifically talk about Sergeant John Owai. Several years ago, he too just felt a very strong connection, his wife being from Mexico, to work with the Hispanic community. Through all these, like the Inclusion Task Force or RAP, I get to understand the mistrust or the skepticism that comes from these communities, whether it's from their own country or not, or just some kind of experience that they've had here. John took it upon himself to go into the Hispanic community through the churches, through apartment buildings, you name it. He does weekly radio shows to broadcast both here and back in Mexico, and it has made a world of difference. Just having somebody in there that looks like you, talks like you, makes a huge difference for us in the law enforcement side. So when people come in, we obviously have many people that are multilingual, but John being one of those, he's a common name that people come in and will ask for him directly to kind of help us out. I know there's some pictures there at the radio show, but he goes to the churches, the schools, all on his own to try and establish that relationship between law enforcement and these different communities. That was me pulling on the rope.
And this one, I don't know if you recognize the image in the photograph, but unfortunately, there was a shooting in Seattle where a Native American woodcarver was shot by the police. And the Monday after that shooting, Deborah Horn from Cairo 7 called us and came to our RAP meeting. The photo on the left is our meeting right here at the conferencing center that we were having with the pastors. And she came to our meeting and she actually covered that meeting and then talked about it and shared it to say how cities can build relationships, and showed that as a contrast to show the good work that Renton PD was doing as a contrast to the type of relationships that were happening in Seattle. And we were not out there having these meetings to be on TV. We were having these meetings to build our relationships and to build the trust, because we actually had Dr. Smith even talk about that, last week when we had our meeting. So, I have to say that the city is very, very caring and nimble, and that's just been the attitude that's been here. And I have worked in Seattle. Benita's worked in Seattle. I've worked with King County. So I can almost take the view of an outsider and say that, we really have people here who care, and that's what makes the difference. You've all heard about the sanctuary city and what happened then. And there's not necessarily a right or a wrong here. But if you go right outside the mayor's office, there's actually a framed proclamation of an inclusive city in Spanish. And we had a lot of discussion around that time with the Latina community. And some folks, at that time said, should we be a sanctuary city? Should we not? Like I said, there's no right or wrong answer. But at that time, the mayor issued a proclamation and for an inclusive city. And some members of the Latina community, they translated this and they distributed this among the Latina community. And so part of that community felt if we went with the sanctuary city, we'd be attracting unwanted attention. And part of them felt that by actually translating this into Spanish and sharing it, we were in a better place. So like I said, not necessarily you could go one way or the other, but what we at least were doing was sitting and listening to the community and trying to work with them, which was in some ways, I feel, better than doing nothing at all, or better than being, overly in one direction. So here are things that we are doing. We have training every year. It's mandatory for every city, every city staff. HR is very proactive. And we have an equity lens. We use it very proactively. You got a handout that Benita will talk about soon after I you hear from HR. So there are investments that are put citywide, again, all with the goal of making this an inclusive city for all our employees and making sure our services are right and that we're on the right track and that there's a lot more for us to do. There are examples across the departments. There's several of them. The ones that we are proud of, Gay Pride, the ones that our city attorney's office have done. Obviously, the language line, great stuff that's been done with ASD. We're still working on rolling out our contractor services. We're going to be working on that. We have some great ideas with the chamber this year. And CED has done some great stuff with Startup 425. Here's just the look at our Meadowcrest playground and its accessibility. That's, again, award-winning in the area. Lots of our community services program, Women's Only Swim at Henry Moses. We were one of the first to do that. And again, not enough can be said. Every day there's an example from Renton PD, the wonderful stuff that they've done. I'd love to call Ellen for her to talk about our tactical plan because this is another, I don't know if there are Oscars, but if there are, she should get one. Yeah. Thank you.
Good evening, Council President Perez, and all of the rest of the council members. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. And thank you, Preeti, for that nice introduction. We are very proud of the HR Tactical Inclusion Plan, and I'll just take a moment to say that we've even taken that show on the road. I would like to do a shout out to my colleague, Jan Hahn. She had invited me to a finance conference just to talk about the HR Tactical Inclusion Plan and diversifying hiring across financial institutions. And I got a lot of questions, and I've had a lot of follow-up from members of that conference. So thank you, Jan, for including me in that. We've made some progress with regard to gender and other minority diversification in our city. As you can see from one of the slides, we've moved a little off the mark from 2016 to 2019, putting our main focus on 2018, and 2019 when we put our plan into place. We were at 37% female population of employees and vacancies filled versus 63% male in 2016. And in 2019, at the end, matching end of year over end of year. We had 39% vacancies filled by women compared to 61% by men. And it's a slight move, but it's movement in the right direction and for the right reasons. If you'll look at the next slide, we had more movement when it comes to minority hires. We're very proud of this fact. We increased our minority vacancies by 14% from 2016 to 2019, end of year over end of year. And we consider that to be significant, with more work ahead. The strategies that I want to call out from our HR Tactical Inclusion Plan, and I'm not sure, Preeti, was a copy of that plan included in the materials? We can get that. We can absolutely get that for you. Plus, we're updating it, so it might be better just to see the updated version. But these were some of our strategies. It all began with the equity lens, which is something Preeti just talked about. One of the ways HR used the equity lens was to go through all of our job descriptions, first and foremost, to say, do we have some barriers in those job descriptions that would keep people from all walks of life from applying for our positions? I'll name one example, the requirement to have a driver's license. That requirement actually exists for very few positions in the city, and yet we found it in almost every one of our job descriptions. So example number one, we took it out if it was not applicable. That's an opportunity to open employment and lift a barrier. We use our NeoGov software platform as a way of getting applications in the door. It also helps us track applicants. Of course, that's based on whether or not they fill out the EEO portion of our application, which is confidential, but we do use it to track the numbers, which is how we were able to assess the change from 2016 to 2019 with our minority hires. And we continue to use the NeoGov platform. We also began using anonymous applications. Some of you may have, well, all of you heard of it because we announced it when we launched our HR Tactical Inclusion Plan. The applications come into the city with names, addresses, and all of the information that my staff need to determine if someone is qualified to move ahead with a position. Once we determine that they have minimally qualified for the position, then we cleanse the application from the name, the address, and something that only has just started happening in other cities, but we've been doing it for a while, we took out the salary box as well. And that's because of gender pay inequities. So that's another thing that we are handling from our perspective. And so then the hiring managers and the subject matter experts are looking at the application purely for its credentials that are listed on it and the requirements that are minimally required. And from that, and I'm proud to say that the very first hire we ever had under this was in my own office, was our risk analyst. Her name is Kelsey Turnez. And one of the things that she said after she was hired was she asked the hiring manager, "Did you know that I was a girl?" Which was kind of a unique question because she has such a background in the Navy. And she wondered if that would be a catch. And her manager was happy to tell her, "I did not have a clue what your gender was, and it did not matter. I was going off of the credentials that were listed on the application." I consider that to be a win, and that's what we're experiencing across the city. Other things that we've done is supported employee. We're really proud of this. And let me stop by saying that there's a gentleman sitting behind me. His name is Brian Sandler. He's a senior HR analyst. Brian, if you could raise your hand so they know who I'm talking about. He's really the one that's been so instrumental in all of this. He does the research, he does the implementation, and next to the term perseverant in the dictionary is Brian Sandler's picture. This man knows what he's doing, he does the research, and he sticks with it, and I can't thank him enough. This imported employee position was one of his ideas that he brought to us from Highline Community College, and I'm proud to say, if I'm flipping ahead in the interest of time, to some of our accomplishments that we hired in August of 2018. He works out of the city clerk's office under the direction of Jason Seth, our city clerk. Thank you, Jason. You're doing a marvelous job. His name is Mahamud, and he works for 3 departments, but we had the support of 3 departments: Public Works, Community and Economic Development, Community Services, and under the tutelage of Jason Seth. So he does a variety of projects for us. That was in August of 2018. In the fall of 2019, the City of Renton received the Community Employment Alliance 2019 Outstanding Employer Award for the hire and the start of that program in our fine city. And we hope that we'll be able to expand it in the years to come because it not only changes the life of the person that we hire, full-time pay, full-time benefits. It changes the complete standing for their families who they live with, but it also enriches the lives of those who work around supported employees. And it's a gift really that keeps on giving, and it will for a long time. Some of our other accomplishments through our inclusion work have been to work with the police department and the school district to expand our youth academy. And whenever we do anything with the youth, what we're doing is we're planting seeds for future employees. That's the way that we look at it, so that they can look at us as a viable place to work and to thrive. We collaborated with facilities staff to create a quiet room for staff. In fact, through some of the renovations, we've had to dismantle the quiet room, and we have had a steady stream of phone calls from employees who want to know if it's coming back, and it is coming back. We're just trying to find a permanent place for it. We expanded our internship program by partnering with Youth Source, Jewish and Family Services, and Track and Associates to garner support for some interns. And of course, anytime we have an intern in an internship program, again, we're planting seeds for employment for the future. And this year will mark our 6th annual career fair at the Renton Technical College, a career fair that's been very successful. So what are we looking at doing in 2020 with a better vision of where we're headed? We're going to be continuing to build cultural competency by creating a speakers forum. We'll begin that speakers forum at the spring quarterly managers meeting with a member from the LGBTQIA community who will be coming to provide us with awareness and sensitivity training. We'll continue to do our implicit bias training with the partnership of Benita Horn and Preeti. We will continue to foster a culture of inclusion by finding that permanent location for the quiet room, and through our executive, through messaging, on our online portals for hiring. And then we will be continuing to do our outreach. And I just listed 3 items here, but are we advertising in the right places? Are we reaching the right areas of our community? We're going to do a pilot project to see what those best areas are, and then we're going to look to see if we can find the resources and the funding for those projects. And last but not least, and something that I'm particularly excited about, is interview transparency. When someone is about to interview or even consider employment with us, what do they know about our process? So we want to put it out there and tell them, this is what our process looks like. This is what you can expect when you go to an interview. We're going to be participating in Lindbergh High School's career day and helping with mock scenes and mock interviews and helping them learn how to write resumes. So we're really excited about that, because the key here is that people will come to you when they have a lot of choices if they know what to expect and they believe that you're welcoming and that you think that they count. So, thank you.
Just a couple more slides. We have made a name for ourselves. We've got, awards and recognition, and we do coordinate regionally. We are a member of a group called the Governance for Regional Equity and Inclusion. Essentially, it started informally with us getting together with our neighbors, and then that became a more formal alliance, and then we had a regional conference. And it really did start with us, working with our colleagues at King County, and then it became this group. But like I said, it's always a journey. It's never a check mark that it's all over. And some of the things that at least we see initially as challenges are, our demographics are continuing to change. And we'll keep seeing that as we see changes in Seattle, and we see, everything is related. As we see the affordable housing situation, the business situation, and we see those movements of populations, we'll see that it impacts us. And it also continues to make those things harder. We might have had successes in reaching out to certain groups of our community, but for every one group that we reach out to, there are other groups that are harder to reach. And even within community groups, there are, conversations that there are differences within the group. So it's a huge task to be able to reach out to people, to get them engaged, to sustain them, even within our liaisons and within the groups. And then, of course, how do you reach out to all levels of socioeconomic groups? How do you have funding? You know, when some programs like our HR, housing repair assistance programs, when they do well, how do you have enough funding? It's sometimes at saturation. And then there are programs we know we can do better, the neighborhood program. How can you integrate that with the inclusion program and things like that? Metrics. You always want to be able to justify your return on investment. For that, you need metrics. There are some things that our departments, ASD, that have done really incredible just to even get the baseline so that we can start establishing numbers so we can go forward. But again, lots to go, miles to go before we sleep. And always, I think the bottom line is the support that's here, the support from you, from the mayor, from the department heads, that's key and that's crucial and critical. But it has to keep being there at every level so that it permeates down and it's taken so that everyone sees. And at the end of the day, it's also got to be a value proposition because it's got to make business sense for everyone for it to work. And next steps, we gave you a copy of the inclusion report of 2019. I'll have Benita come and say a few words about that. But I also want you to know that through the years, and every year, and last year, we are recalibrating, because if anything is stagnant, it will not work. And so some major changes were made, the change with the RAP, and how we were approaching the group, looking at younger youth in the African community, looking at how to reach out to the non-churchgoer community, some changes in the scope of work with Benita, changes in training. So we've already started doing a lot of that, but I'm also really looking forward to some real engaging discussions with the retreat so that we can really look at what can we build upon and do next.
Thank you, Preeti. Council President, council members, Chief Administrative Officer, thank you all. I just want to say three things, and those of you who know me know it's very seldom that I say only three things. But first of all, and this is over and above the three things, I really urge you to read this summary. Preeti and I have periodically done check-ins with administrators. When we did our check-in last year, kind of in the fourth quarter of the year, we were amazed. 5 years ago, when I started working with you as a resource, there was pretty much a lot of consultation, and questions that the departments had as they launched things or tried new approaches or tried to identify barriers and remove them. And so we had a pretty good feel about some of the things that were going on. Most of the things we heard, we had not a clue were going on. So when Preeti says inclusion is part of the DNA, this is what we truly saw, that it's the way the departments are doing business, and they have embedded that in. So I don't think that each of the departments knows what the other is doing. I think some parts of departments don't know what's going on in other parts of the departments. So that was one of our motivations for publishing this, not only as a way of sharing information. Some of the best practices we're looking for are right here in the city. And so it's a way of sharing practices and also just affirming the work that has been done. So that's number one. Number two, Brenton isn't my only client, although it's my favorite. I won't tell my other clients. But I do work mostly in the nonprofit and in government sector. And, my focus is always, as it is here, organizational development and social justice. And I see the two as yin-yang, just flip sides of the same picture. I don't believe you can do one without the other. But one of the things that's unique about Renton, and that I do share with many of my other clients, is this document. You know, first of all, it's unique that you have a business plan on one side of one piece of paper. But the other thing that's unique about this is that this is the only institution where I've been a consultant where every leader in the organization has co-created this document and is in alignment with this document. And sees the goals on this document as a priority. In some jurisdictions, and you probably know of some, you can't get consul and staff to agree on whether it's night or day, and I don't see that here in Renton at all. And that is that's the foundation for making this real. I also want to mention that this is not an exhaustive summary. This report is a high-level summary. It does not include everything. So I would I really believe that I can say without bias that although no place is perfect, there are a lot of things that are done here that aren't done other places. There was a whole task force of administrators who came together to develop the Renton Equity Lens and then to begin using it. When we first started the training that Preeti mentioned, typically in organizations, they want someone in the organization to co-facilitate with me as a way, because that's part of our capacity building. But this was the first and only organization where when I asked the administrators who my co-facilitators would be, they all lined up and said, us. We want to teach this because we want to be able to support our folks. And so my co-facilitators in the first 2 years were all members of the administrative team. So there's just a lot of things that, as I said, aren't in this summary. I encourage you to continue your curiosity, that when you have opportunities to interface with staff, you know, and you don't even ask them anymore, what are you doing about inclusion? Ask them what they're doing, and you will hear the stories about inclusion. So thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
First of all, thank you very much for all the work that you put together. I was very, very impressed about the inclusion summary. I thank all the administrators. All of you did incredible work. I'm very, very proud of the work that we have been doing, and I know that we have to do more, but thank you very much for all the work that you put behind this presentation. I was very, very impressed. With that, any questions or comments?
I do.
Yes, Councilmember Ban.
Thank you, Preeti. I do have a question regarding the hiring process, just kind of if you could please enlighten me a little bit more. As the point as far as when an applicant submit the application, when does it become that they get a anonymous number or an ID attached to that? Or can you kind of just go back and lay out the process again?
Absolutely. So the application comes in, and the human resource analyst that's assigned to that recruitment reviews all of the applications that come in for that particular job, like let's say custodian. And once they see that the applicants have met minimum qualifications, then our NeoGov software, through a command that the HR analyst asks it to do, cleanses the application of the name and address and salary box and assigns it a random number through the system. After that is done, then those applications are then sent on to the hiring manager for their review. So that's where it happens. Does that answer your question?
So then at some point, then the name is still in the beginning. They still see the name, and then to qualify minimally. In order
The
to
HR analyst sees the full application and the name, because we have to have a name attached to it when it comes in through our system, and then it gets assigned the random number before it leaves our department and that portal and goes out to the hiring manager. Actually, it's the same portal, but it leaves through a different system.
And then at the point of the interview, depending on how many applicants are getting interviewed, how do we use the equity lens? Because at the point in time, we will have to see that there are at least 2 individuals that are getting interviewed, right?
We try to get as many as we can, up to 5 or 6 in a day's time. And so we do add the names back in once they're selected to be interviewed so that the interview panel can see who they are. And we add back in the names on the applications. To use the equity lens in terms of our interview questions, we're asking questions that are, of course, all within our legal boundaries to use, as well as getting the result, the best result for the answer that we're asking. And prior to that, and to set up the applicant so that they have the best chance, we allow them to review the interview questions prior to the interview taking place. They can take notes on it and bring those notes with them to the interview.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you again. Thank you to everybody. And this meeting is adjourned.